Good evening. Welcome to the web talks of UPES. Our today's talk is on clinical research. Is it a career for me? And I have with me Mr. Vijay Vaidya, who is Director, Statistical Programming, AstraZeneca, US. He has more than 20 years of experience in clinical research in pharmaceutical industry and academia. He has been associated with leading organizations like AstraZeneca, Novartis, and Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. His research interests include cardiovascular outcomes and prevention trials. In his current role, he focuses on good clinical practices, analysis, and reporting of clinical trial data, and ensuring regulatory compliances for new drug applications. He also worked in India earlier and facilitated European Commission health sector reform initiatives in state of Himachal Pradesh as European Commission technical assistance representative between 2002 and 2006. He is an alumnus of Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health, where he did his MPH. And earlier, he did his undergraduation in chemistry from Himachal Pradesh University, and followed by his master's in business administration, again from Himachal Pradesh University. Welcome, Vijay, and thank you for accepting our invitation.
Thank you, Neeraj, and thank you, everyone. It's an honor and it's a pleasure to be with you, all of you today. And I'm very delighted, especially in these times of COVID-19. I think clinical research, very relevant topic. At least the whole world knows the race towards finding a cure or a vaccine, and how do we cope up with. So again, my pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Vijay. So before we move on to your presentation, I'll briefly introduce our university and also the School of Health Sciences. So University of Petroleum and Energy Studies was established in 2003, initially primarily as an engineering and business university, but it grew into other disciplines and now is a multidisciplinary university with law, engineering, computer sciences, design, health sciences, and the latest addition is media school. And the School of Health Sciences was established in 2019, and we started with 2 programs, and we are adding 10 new programs this year. So last year we started with B Pharmacy and BSc in Food Nutrition and Dietetics. And this year we are adding clinical research. We are also so BSc and MSc programs, and as Vijay, you mentioned, a very relevant area in current times. We are also adding BSc and MSc programs in microbiology, which is again very important if we see the current scenario of COVID-19. So training students on say virology and microbiology. And then we are also starting MSc program in pharmaceutical chemistry and MSc program in nutrition and dietetics. Besides that, we are also introducing BTech program in food technology and MBA and BBA programs in healthcare administration. So we are located in Dehradun, in scenic foothills of Himalayas, and a very green campus. We have around 16,000 students, out of 12,000 on campus and around 4,000 for distance education. And we are also working on research, and the university specializes in tying up with the industries to impart education. So that's how we are known for. So Vijay, as you mentioned that, of course, the clinical trials has been in focus, and day in and day out, we have been talking about clinical trials now when the vaccine would come out, when the molecules which are being tested, and some of them have already been approved in India as well as in US and other countries. And so this field has come into a limelight in last few months. And that has also brought out the importance of health sciences as a field, pharmaceuticals, and India's role as the pharmacy of the world. And there are a lot of questions which audience would have. What this field is, what are the prospects, what kind of uh, backgrounds can get into it, uh, what is the skill set required. So we'll go to these questions after your talk. So now over to you, Vijay, and maybe can talk for say next 25 to 30 minutes, and then we'll open up for the questions. And we are also live on Facebook, so people have also joined over Facebook.
Sounds good. And again, thank you so much. Let me start with the presentation, and I would be happy to answer any questions those come my way. And let me share my screen, and please let me know if all of you can hear me clearly and are able to see my screen. Do you see the screen?
Yeah, Vijay, we can go ahead.
All right, sounds good. Again, thank you, Neeraj, so much for the lovely introduction and talking about the relevancy of clinical research and to be specific for the clinical trials as well in this COVID-19. And one thing that has happened, it's very unfortunate event that has happened. The whole world is on a sort of a standstill, but it has brought clinical research more into focus. It was always very relevant, and it always had the components where there was always activity going on. And not only right now, but from early 1900s, the medicine has made leaps and bounds in terms of the prevention, the cure, and the treatment, and emerging infections right from HIV to SARS to now COVID-19. So the race is already on. It just has brought focus, the terminology, the people know what is herd immunity, what is flattening of curves. So that's very heartening in a way to know the field which existed for so long has so much prominent focus. So clinical research, is it for me, the title, and I was thinking, what would you require to be a clinical researcher? Is it a research the way we do think about it in the labs, scientists working in their white coats? It's much more than that. And is it boring? Definitely not. To me, I think it's one of the very exciting professions. It's very dynamic, it's very exciting, it's always changing because you have a science, you gain new knowledge, you build on those foundations, and you discover something more around it. And these days, every day you would hear when the vaccine will be ready, when the new therapeutic options will come into the place. So could not be a more important day to talk about this. So what exactly is clinical research? What all it involves? What is the breadth? What's the scope of a clinical research? And I just went on to Wikipedia, like most of you would go do something when we look for some new term. We either go to Google or we go to Wikipedia. We try to find the relevant information. And the reason I went to Wikipedia, I thought it would be good just to see, besides me as a professional, what people are talking about, and is there any concise information? And of course, website, you do have a lot of information out there, and I highlighted few of the points here. It's about the safety. If you think about the medication, the clinical research, what you would do as a clinical research professional is the first things to find out the medication, what you're being developing, is it safe? Is it going to be effective? It could be medication, it could be a diagnostic, it could be a screening test. And are we going to find a prevention, like vaccine trials, or a treatment, say in COVID-19? if someone is affected by COVID-19, are there going to be a viable treatment options, or could we do something to, alleviate the symptoms, if not totally cure someone? So looking into that, if you think about clinical research is a research that involves people to test new treatments and therapies. And then within a clinical research, there is a clinical trial, which is a prospective study where you test your medications on human subjects prospectively with either another medication or placebo to see if the new medication, which is under the research, is really effective or not. So we would limit our topic of clinical research in this presentation to involving of human subjects into the experimentation. And then I thought it would be good to just give you an idea of the drug development process. Especially the question is asked, why is it taking so long to find the treatments or the vaccine trial? It's a very, very complex process. And I picked this slide from Food and Drug Administration US website, where it does talk about typical drug development process cycle. It takes 3 to 6 years in a drug discovery and preclinical stage to identify molecules which may work, which may have relevant biological activity, which looks that they may work effectively in human beings. So from 10,000 compounds up to roughly 250 to 10 compounds actually make it to the clinical trial phase. Very, very less number of molecules which would reach that stage where we would think this drug is safe enough to be tested in human beings. Those can tolerate, there would not be any side effects, and we would think that the benefits of doing this clinical trial will outweigh with any risks. So that process, it's categorized into 3 different phases. I would not go too much into detail, but phase 1 is essentially establishing the safety of the drug profile, where you have very few subjects. Then on to the phase 3, which is the final phase of a clinical trial, where the drug gets tested in a large number of participants before it comes to the market. And this phase sometimes lasts 6 to 7 years. Not only you have to define the efficacy, but you have to make sure there are not side effects today. They may not have side effects in the long term. If there are side effects, we do know about those. We also do know how to manage those side effects. And the most important question, if I'm taking a medication and if it has a side effects, do the benefits of that treatment outweigh those side effects? Benefit to risk ratio, the way we call it. Once that safety and effectiveness profile is established, you submit your drug to the worldwide regulatory agencies for the approval. You make case for it. You present your data. You talk about the mechanism of action. You talk about the morbidity it's going to treat, and the benefit it's going to bring to the society. It's a very, very stringent process, very strict steps. And even once you have proven everything at your end, as a pharma company or a clinical research institution or academia, it takes roughly between 6 months to 2 years for the regulatory agencies to approve the drug, because they have to evaluate the data. They have to substantiate your claims. It's a big responsibility. It's because they are the gatekeepers of what comes into the market. Is it going to be safe for the population? Does it improve the health status for the individuals? And does it improve a society? Does it make it even healthier? So all those questions that if you look at into the whole process, minimum on an average, before you bring the drug to the market, it's 9 to 10 years. And at the most, it could take up to 15 years. It's very complex. It's very expensive, process. I again went on to the internet and I found one study from Johns Hopkins where They did a little cost calculation. How much money does it take to bring one drug to the market? And I'm talking about here cardiovascular drug trials. Average cost is around 157 million. And that's only for the phase 3 trial. It does not talk about rest of the years in a preclinical stage, in the lab stage, where you spend money on a research and development before, the drug comes into the market. Substantial investment. What does it mean? Thousands of people involved in that process, right from a physicians to the pharmacists, statisticians, epidemiologists, data management, technology companies, you name it. And it's an operation like a conveyor belt where each individual plays a very important role. Today, if I'm taking any drug, or a physician is prescribing any drug to my loved ones, to my family members, I would want it to be safe. I would want it to be effective. So when you work as a clinical research professional, it's a huge responsibility. It's important and imperative for all of us to do our jobs skillfully, diligently, and it also means that we do have a required qualifications to do it well. So in this presentation, as I mentioned, the clinical trial would be the key space and where I would be talking about primarily, but it's relevant in a broader aspect of a clinical research, what we do in the hospitals, what we do in academia. So a little bit about the industry overview. I would begin with the global overview, and this is again specific to clinical trials. It does not talk about pharmaceutical industry as a whole, how much money we do spend annually to do, clinical trials in phase 1, 2, and 3. It's $69.7 billion industry approximately, and the growth rate is 5%. And with changes in technology, changes in awareness, and especially a lot of you would have your cell phones which monitor your blood pressure monitors or your Fitbits which count your steps. Non-stop flow of data. How do you handle that data? So there's a lot of complexity right now in terms of how do we process, how do we compute, making this industry increasingly more attractive to individuals with different backgrounds. So phase 3 trials account for roughly 53% of the market. Of course, patient is at the center stage of everything. Now let's compare it with India, where Indian clinical research industry specific to the drug discovery stands for phase 3 trials. $1.6 billion, projected to be $3.7 billion in 2027. Much higher growth rate than the global growth rate of approximately 8.7, so close to 9%. And again, phase 3 trials account for 50% of this market share. And if you think about India globally, we do have 16% of world population approximately, and 20% of the global burden of disease. And we do conduct 1.4% global trials. So huge potential. We do have very strong knowledge base in terms of manpower, very well educated, very well informed, very, very competitive. We do have a population which needs medications. We do have a population which is coming out of poverty. We have made significant strides out there. So I do believe the industry, the clinical research industry is going to grow much more at much faster rate than what projected right now. And the future looks very, very bright. And then let's add COVID-19 into the mix. I would not go into the details, but this is a homework for the participants. If you go and look into clinicaltrials.gov website, which is a website in US that registers the new clinical trials, or just scan the newspapers, see how many clinical trials are going on right now, how many therapeutic interventions, how many vaccine trials right now. That's just one aspect what COVID-19 is doing. But in addition, it brings a lot of uncertainty as well. Not only for clinical research, but to the industries as a whole. will we have enough funding to do those trials? I just mentioned the trials are very, very expensive. But then, can we do those trials more efficiently? Can we save costs somewhere? Can we do have manpower which is very competent and at a cheaper price? So a lot of factors, if you combine everything into it, future in India looks very promising. It will grow at much, much faster rate than the rest of the world. Of course, what it would require investment in a science in terms of education, technology. How do we process the big data? How do we create our platforms? For example, today we are having this call on a Zoom, and I'm sitting just in my basement and talking to all of you. And innovations, and what innovation does mean, it does not mean something radical change also. It could be small incremental change that brings improvement in the processes, or it could be a radical change in idea. How do we do the trials? Is it really feasible to bring vaccine in 2 to 3 years into the market? Are we ready for it? Do we have enough technology to assure that there won't be side effects in the long term? How do we measure that? How do we predict that? Even if we are able to do that, do we have enough supply chain to provide that vaccine globally to each and every individual? Not a mean task at all. That's where, you would require out-of-box solutions, innovations, but the foundation will remain science and technology. So again, I picked these numbers from website. I have mentioned the link below, and I will provide it to Dr. Neeraj Mahendra. CRO, and what is CRO? And clinical research organization are the companies, those provide support to pharmaceutical firms, biotechnological firms, or medical device industries on a contract basis. They do provide services where, they may do the drug development, they may do preclinical research or clinical research or clinical trials management. They are hotbed for the recruitment, to learn and to get your foothold in industry and develop as a professional. They do amazingly good work. It's a very, very successful partnership between pharmaceutical industry and CRO. They are projected to grow at 11.4% in the, by the end of 2026. And these numbers are global. I would assume these numbers will be much higher in India as well than the global numbers. So what really do you do in clinical research? I do get asked this question very often. My parents do ask me, what do I really do? And I do try and explain it to them, sometimes successfully, sometimes little unsuccessfully. But let me try and say, is it just research? Of course, it's a research. And does it mean researching just in the lab? No, not at all. It's actually a lot more. And what I'll do here is I would talk very briefly about different components of clinical research. And I will just provide a very broad overview because I would want to save as much time to interact with all of you and do a question and answer session. But let's just look into it. What really clinical research has different components beyond what we think of a research doing in the labs, looking into the patients, diagnosing and seeing if they are treated or not. But what goes behind the scenes? So what are the core competencies, when we talk about clinical research, or we talk about clinical trial operations? It's a critical component for all the studies. When you start a study to finishing the study, what we call a closeout, you require a highly skilled clinical operations team to do the planning. Where would you conduct the trial? Which countries? Within a country, which area? Where would you find the patients? Which hospitals are equipped to do that trial? Do we have enough physicians, pharmacists, nurses who are trained in a research? Do we have people who can manage the documentation? How do we plan the communication between those study sites? and the sponsors. It could be pharmaceutical industry, it could be CRO. A trial could be running in, I have seen trials which have run in say 100 plus countries in 1,000 plus clinical sites. Very, very complex operation. How do you manage it? It's not that simple. Project management could be one of the component that requires. And if you talk about project management that builds on a foundation of a clinical research, uh, understanding the processes, knowing what it requires, and then building the project management on top of it, for an example. So clinical trial operations is one of the components which employs significant number of people, require backgrounds from management, from project management, from technology, from hospital administration, you name it, and you will find personnel involved into clinical trial operations. What about data management in informatics? I did briefly touch upon right now, there is a data overload. We are collecting data at a neck-breaking speed. My sensor provides my blood pressure in a continuous loop, 24/7, that gets stored in a device somewhere. Before even I am able to analyze that data, question is, how do I manage that such a huge amount of data? Is it going to give me relevant information which I need? Or is it too much data? Those kind of questions. Once you answer those questions, and where would we store it? What would be the cost to store it? When we need to retrieve it, at what speed we can retrieve it? If we are going to analyze, do we even have enough computing power to analyze? And I'm just talking about one individual data. Think about if it's a cardiovascular trial where tens, thousands of subjects are enrolled in a trial, their trial data spanning over 3 to 4 years of the period of a trial, and trial can run for 6 years, 7 years if it's a prevention trial. Uh, how do you make sense of it? Where does the technology come into play? Do I look for a software engineer, computer engineer? That's good enough. But is that sufficient enough? Or would I look for a candidate who knows data management, but understands clinical research as a basic tenet? It's not only the tool, what to do, it's also the know-how behind it, what you're doing and why you are doing it. The combination of two. So software engineer professionals from different engineering backgrounds, those can come into data management and informatics, data science, data mining, predictive modeling. So you name it, there are endless avenues out there. So I just listed few of the bullets, but in a sense, it's collecting the data, storing the data, retrieving the data, and allowing it to be in a format that allows easy analysis, reporting, and interpretation of the data. Again, then you have to have this data as per what we call as the GCP requirements. GCP stands for Good Clinical Practices. And there are standards in the industry. How do we maintain that data integrity? Once we have collected the data, is it accurate? Can someone else change that data? If the data is changed by a mistake, is there an audit trail? How do we maintain that integrity of data? How do we remove the biases? Endless questions, endless possibilities out there. Ethics. One very important part of clinical research to me is ethical and participant safety considerations. Are we doing the clinical research just for the sake of a clinical research? Or do we know the people who are enrolled in a trial are going to be safe? And is there an already established medicine in the market? Why do we even need to do this particular clinical research? If there are already 10 diabetes products in the market, what the new 11th diabetes drug would bring to the patients, how it will benefit. Is it okay for me to have those participants enrolled into this trial and put them at risk, not really knowing whether the drug is going to be effective or not? Those are kind of questions what the clinical trial deals with, and you do have people who do look into those ethical considerations. Does your institutional review board, does your ethical review board would approve your research? Does it really make sense? And is there a clinical equipoise? What it really means is there genuine uncertainty in the medical community whether treatment will be beneficial or not? And therapeutic misconception, is the subject who's enrolled in a trial really does understand that he or she may not be getting the treatment, but maybe just getting a placebo, because you need to have a comparator out there. Are they well informed? And if your participant is not very well educated, is the informed consent, what we say before they agree to participate in a trial, is it communicated to them in their own language? Is the wording simple enough? Grade 6, grade 8 level of understanding. Do we have taken into account those scenarios? So it's another field where you evaluate any new research proposal. You determine the benefits, you look at the risks, and basic consideration is if benefit outweighs the risk or not. Are my participants going to be safe or not? Is this research really needed? How it benefits society? So, and especially with the vulnerable populations, how about the people who are not able to consent for themselves, who are in a terminal stages and not responsive? How about the children who need the medication, who need the treatment? Uh, how do we consent them because they are not able to understand what clinical trial is? Is it okay to put them through the clinical trial? So very, very ethical questions, sometimes not easy answers. It requires a lot of debate among individuals. Regulatory environment, very, very important. As I said, once we have the drug, we go into the market, we talk about the potential of the drug, but we go to the government agencies the world over, Food and Drug Administration in United States, the EMA, European Medical Agency in Europe, PDMA in Japan, and Drug General Council of India, I think that's what it is called, in India, where we do present our data. And each country has a different requirement before you bring that medication into the country, before you can launch it, before you and I go to the physician and who prescribes it for us to ensure what we have done is safe, the drug really works, and it's going to benefit the population and the disease burden in those countries. So very, very important. I will quickly run through. I'm looking at my clock also, and I see I'm already at 26 minutes of my talk. Research design. How do you design research? What question we are going to answer? How are we going to analyze the question? Do we have enough instrument to capture what drug is doing in our bodies, how it's getting excreted, what's the mode of action, and do we know all the adverse events, or possibly have we anticipated any adverse events? Have we answered the most important question we are going to answer? Do we have our hypothesis in place? Again, requires a knowledge. It may be biostatistics. It may be simple epidemiology. It could be biochemistry. From where it feels, that comes into scientific concepts and research design to formulate a question and do the research. Designing a clinical trial, again, a very, very important step. If you are going to spend $130 million for next 4 years into a drug, which you do not know if it's going to be successful or not, how do you design a trial? Does it really would answer your question after the end of 6 years or not? Very, very important. Site management, I did touch upon site management initially when we did talk about clinical trial operations. How do we manage these thousands of sites in hundreds of countries and the subjects and protecting them? How do we collect data uniformly? Logistically, extremely challenging operation. opportunity to manage sites, opportunity to travel, opportunity to interact, understand the diversity in our cultures, and utilizing those learnings to leverage that understanding to manage country-specific sites to provide information in a uniform and a consistent way. So essential, but what does it require besides these skill sets to be a good clinical research professional? Communication and teamwork. You need to present your ideas. You need to be able to talk to people in different cultures, in different languages. Be persuasive enough. Are you able to speak and explain things in a comprehensive way? Are you able to present the technical information in a layman's terms? Can you simplify? Because your audience is diverse. On the one hand, a clinical research professional would be talking to a physician, talking about the clinical language, about the primary endpoint. What do we measure? How do we measure? What does heart failure really mean? What are the components of a heart failure? Then you'd go and talk to an epidemiologist who's more interested in the determinants, how the health, this disease is distributed across different populations by gender, maybe by a geographic region. You go and talk to a participant who has no clue about a clinical trial, and how do you explain to them that you're doing the study and that you need their involvement? It involves their participation to advance the science. And how do they benefit? What if they are going to be on a placebo for next 6 years? You are a high risk candidate to have a heart failure, and now you are going to be on a trial for next 6 years, and you may not even get the medicine. You may just get a sugar pill. How do you justify it to that? And how does the participant understand? So communication and teamwork is very, very important. So I'm sorry, I'm just jumping through the slides. But before I close my talks, let's see who are our partners. I did touch upon, patient safety professionals who monitor patient safety, clinical physicians, nurses, pharmacists, regulatory agencies, health economics and outcome groups to make sure that, do we have taken the economic perspective into account? Payer reimbursement, how much would you want to charge for the medication? The money you are spending into the research, but can patients afford if the medication is very expensive? Are we benefiting society or not? Marketing and commercialization, but again, patient is at the heart of everything. As a clinical research, we professionals, we facilitate it. We have to know if are we a rate limiting step, or do we bring all these groups together? Do we understand those roles, what they do, how they do it, and why they do it, and then design a clinical research trial, which is going to be hopefully a successful for the society, for the benefit of a society. The commercial aspect comes much later. It has to be patient first. It has to be thinking about your loved ones, your parents, your siblings, if they're going to be benefiting from this treatment. So we are the subject matter experts who know research. We do know all these other functions, and then we go and create a research design. We become a part of it, and then we execute the trial. So in a sense, we are the scientists who know and understand patient safety and rest of the other groups, but I would put major emphasis on a patient safety because that's the foremost. On that note, what kind of careers? I did touch upon a lot of insights, but I did went online and again looked into what are the entry-level jobs those begin. Clinical research associates, research coordinator, program manager. Some of the terms, what I would recommend is go online, search these terms, see what kind of qualifications those do ask, what qualifications you do have, what additional you need to build upon to have a successful career in the industry. Would you want to be an epidemiologist? Would you want to be a biostatistician? Then what really do you need to do? And if you want to be a clinical research professional who ties all these functions together. And before I go on to question and answer, quickly, what really do I do and what do I enjoy about clinical research? I do enjoy to see the effect when you work for years on one specific drug. When it comes to the market, you see the benefit it gives to the patients. Um, it's very gratifying to see your friends who are taking that drug. You see physicians prescribing that drug and making that difference, the solid foundation on what it builds. And what do I do on my day-to-day job? A tough question to answer. A lot of things. It's managing a trial, submitting it to the regulatory agencies, answering their questions, looking into the data, looking into the analysis, looking what we are seeing is the right. Are we seeing a treatment effect? Is it really a treatment effect or is it a confounding? It encompasses a lot of factors. No one day is similar like a previous day. It's new, it's different, it's challenging to manage. But I think at the end of the day, you're working towards the good of a society. You are in a role that requires a lot of patience. It requires a lot of discussions. It does at times require a lot of late night working. But the benefit professionally to grow as a professional, to grow as an individual, and to see it, how it benefits people immediately around you. I think it's unparalleled. If someone asked me, is it clinical researchers for me? I would say absolutely yes. On that note, thank you. I will stop sharing, Dr. Mahendra, and
Thank you, Vijay. A very comprehensive, and I think you touched upon almost all the aspects. And I think the list of questions which I had prepared, I think you have almost touched almost all of them. But we have lots of questions coming in, and I think you touched upon what different roles are, what different things people do during this in a clinical research, and how it impacts everyone, how satisfying the job is in this field, and you are doing something which helps patients and brings that smile on their face and ensures their safety, which is so important. So let us move on to questions, and we have quite a few of them. But before I go to these questions, I would say bring in the first question, and I think a lot of people have asked that also, asking which specific, say, students from which specific backgrounds can join clinical research. Say, a student who has done MBBS or BSc or MSc, or there was a question about biotechnology or medicinal chemistry. Can they join clinical research, and what do they need to do to join this profession?
Okay, so I think any profession can join. Sometimes even arts, you need to have a narrative also. But let me begin. If you have a medical background, if you have a degree in medicine, say MBBS, clinical research provides you a foundation how to run a trial. If you're a physician, you're working in a hospital, and if clinical trial is happening there, if there is a position to be an investigator, then just having a degree in medicine is not enough. You need to understand what clinical research involves, what are the different steps, how would you implement the protocol, what does this clinical research design mean, how would you collect the data in a standardized way, what instructions would you give to your nursing staff, how would you dispense the drug, how would you maintain the adherence as an investigator, as a leader at that specific site. So talking about moving from the physician career, I'll take some extreme scenarios. Let's say someone who comes from a background where you have your undergrad degree not in a science field, but in another field. Can you join clinical research? Of course, yes. Once you have done your trial, one part I touched upon, how to communicate it to a layman. Uh, the communication skills. Can you take a scientific text, break it down into a simple communication that someone, coming from a rural India uh, does not understand those scientific terms? Can you create a communication? Can you create a narrative around it? Yes, but will a degree just in a literature will be sufficient? Probably not. What would you again need is that orientation, what clinical research does, what this drug benefits is. Are you overstating something? Can you objectively translate something into a very simple language, but still retain the scientific essence without distorting the scientific claims? Then going into the engineering, we did talk about how data is very important. Um, how do we remotely capture the data? Which server do you store in it? How do you retrieve it? Can you build an algorithm to retrieve those terabytes of data very efficiently? Can you distribute it across the servers for me and my team to analyze in a different context? Can we bring this data together? How do we deal with those logistic challenges coming from someone who's done an engineering background, a plain science background? If you have a background in a biology, uh, do you understand the mechanism? If you understand clinical research, you could be a part of a pharmacokinetic research, pharmacodynamic, where we do study what the drug does to the body and what body is doing to your drug. But then you would need additional foundation. What is PK principles? What is pharmacokinetic principles? Coming to project management, if you have to run this trial, which is running for 6 years, for an example, running in say 110 countries and has 4,000 clinical sites and 20,000 patients, extremely complex project management, logistic challenges. How do you manage that? Then if you have a management experience, can you leverage that? Can you tie it together? Because there would be a lot of clinical research terms thrown in with you while you're in the meetings. So you still need that background. I hope that's sufficient enough. If you have a passion to do something, if you would want to be a part of it, you just need a little additional background. And I think
So,
there is no
Vijay,
limit.
what kind of additional background would you suggest? So, doing say MSc in clinical research or some other way to do it. So, say if there's a computer engineer or a B Farm or maybe a BSc or say a dental doctor. So what additional things do they need to do? So one possibility could be say doing a master's in clinical research. And
Okay.
how important would it be to do such a course?
So,
And I'll add one more thing to that. Do you need a background knowledge of biology to be in clinical research?
uh, not necessarily, but you have to build that knowledge um, to be successful. So let's take an example. You did talk about engineer. There are two ways to look upon it. Do you just want to be a technical, okay, I will create a database, I will create you know, algorithms, I will host it on a server, I will encrypt it, I will maintain data integrity, and my job is done? Uh, Potentially, yes. But if you do understand good clinical practices, what ICH guidelines means, what it means to have a data in clinical research, which is highly regulated, how do you maintain the audit trail so that when the audits happen, that you can show the integrity of a data. I would think you would definitely need more background, more information, a little bit degree, to have a sustainable career in a clinical research that would take you from a narrow confined, data management activities to a broader realm of a clinical research. Um, Sometimes what happens, clinical research as a field is still it's sort of a very nascent. People do not know much about it. Sometimes we do recruit people and then we do train them. But if there is already a professional who has that aspect and has that background in a clinical research by virtue of the experience or by virtue of a degree, it's much easier for them to land a job. Generally, when I do see the job postings or when people do look for the jobs, we do have that stipulation of like 7 to 10 years of the experience. The reason being because in a lot of places, clinical research is not a very well-defined discipline. So you do expect people do gain experience in different settings, and then they join, proper clinical trial operations. Uh, and then that's a catch-22 question. How do you get that experience for 7 to 10 years when you do not get foothold into the industry? So sometimes you work in academia, sometimes you work with clinical research organizations, but everywhere, if you need to grow faster, if you need to grow in a right way, and if you want to have a meaningful contribution, I think the background knowledge is very, very important. Um, if I have a candidate coming with a clinical research degree, just hypothetically speaking, and one without, I would have more confidence placed in the one to get them have a quick start in their job with a right amount of a training, but feeling confident that they would be independently executing their tasks rather than a close supervision.
So there's a question from one of the audience, and that is like, how much of organic chemistry do you need to do? And so if you want to be in clinical research, how much of organic chemistry do you need to know?
Well, two ways to look at it. To begin with,
And
I
you
have
are
a
a
background
chemist,
in
so
chemistry. Here is someone who has a background in chemistry. Uh, will it help you immediately in a clinical search? No. Do you need a lot of background of organic chemistry? No. Would you learn something? Will it help you? Definitely yes. Suppose you're working where you're analyzing the lab data, which involves a lot of biochemistry, but your background in organic chemistry, understanding little bit, it will help you understand, okay, what ALT is, what AST is, if someone is measuring the liver toxicity for your drug, looking into that, what kind of parameters, what bilirubin is. You may have a background that may help you retain that information and ability to process and interpret that information for right decision making. That's how I would put it.
Okay, so I'll move on to the next one. So there are a few PhDs in biotechnology and other fields who have also joined the session. And so they are asking, is there scope for them also? And do they need to again specialize in clinical research before they can go ahead? Or um, because say they have done a PhD in biotechnology, but might not have sufficient background in clinical research. So to say get a career which would be helping them grow, do they need to do some degree or some specialization in clinical research?
It depends, depending upon how you would want to use your degree. Biotechnology, and if you have a PhD, wonderful. Can you do mechanisms? Yes. If there is a molecule profile, could you understand how it may work in the lab, how it may work in the humans? Perfectly fine. But if you're going to be a part of a clinical trial, and if you want to be say, clinical trial administrator, I think you would need to know the process, the steps, how would you manage it, how would you get the institutional review boards to review your application? How would you interact with the regulatory agencies? There are two ways to go about it. You can gain this experience over the years, or you can go in a concentrated learning format where you gain those skills and you go more prepared, depending upon which route would you want to take. Again, my example, I had my degree in management from when I graduated. And then I ended up doing my master's in public health with my specialization in epidemiology because I wanted to know a little bit more. I wanted to be an epidemiologist and then come into the industry. And it worked much better for me. But then I do know candidates who have PhDs. They do not do any specific course. They learn it over the years and they grow that route also. To me, studying work at Johns Hopkins, I think it was a very good value add for me to be successful in my career.
So Vijay, there's another question which says that which type of course in clinical research would be best and what would be the job opportunities? So like we are offering both BSc and MSc program in clinical research. So what do you think? What should a student say doing the BSc, MSc clinical research will help them in long term in building their careers and growing?
I will tackle this question first slightly differently. When I was young, I was in that phase also. What I would want to do, I would ask people around. Before I realized the phase also, understanding what I really wanted to do, not what people were telling me what they wanted me to do. So first question, what kind of clinical research courses should I do? What do you like within a clinical research? What would you want to focus on? That is one. Two, if you do a clinical research course, people with different backgrounds, it will benefit them differentially. If you have a medical degree, if you're a physician already, and if you do a clinical research, you're looking for an investigator track. Your field, your career growth would be different than someone who has a degree in biosciences and doing a clinical research. That individual may be looking at a program manager, clinical trial administrator, or clinical research associate kind of a career paths. It would help, but depending upon what's your underlying degree, would also define your incremental path. If you're a software engineer, if you're into cloud computing, then it may be clinical research with the focus on data management and informatics would build you. So it would give you an incremental advantage, but the differentials of those advantages will be different depending upon what your background is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Vijay, so there are a lot of certifications being offered these days. So right from pharmacovigilance here, you could specialize in regulatory affairs, marketing, or say scientific or medical writing. So what are these different roles and how, say, people from different fields can fit into these? If you can throw a little bit of light on what exactly are these and do these certifications matter? So say a SAS certification or someone is doing certification in Python or R or some other certifications available. And will they help and how do they correlate with certain backgrounds better?
So let's pick with the first. Let's get on to the data certifications with SAS. SAS is the de facto standard in the industry. All the data what we submit to agencies, we submit it in a SAS XPT files, which is a requirement. But most of the pharmaceutical industry does all its analysis with SAS. So if you know SAS, a big advantage, yes. If you have a certification, that helps a great deal. But question comes, If I have two resumes and one is a SAS certified, one is not, do I pick a SAS certified? It would depend. What lateral knowledge do they have? It's a tool which will benefit you immensely. But do you have enough information, enough background to apply that tool appropriately? Sometimes you do come across, you may be very good in SAS programming, but you may not understand the data very well, or you may not understand the clinical trial question very well. So it may be of a limited significance, but short answer, these certifications help. Coming to medical writing, it's a very valuable in the sense to teach how to write a clinical study report or how to write the primary publication, because how do you communicate scientifically, objectively to the scientific communication without overstating your claims, without understating? And are you communicating what you really did measure? Are you using the right words to communicate it? And if you're sending your publication to the leading journal, say New England Journal of Medicine or Lancet, they do have their certain standards, how they would want their publications, in what format, what kind of a writing style, what kind of a font, what kind of text. So medical writing, not only the narrative, it does include a lot of other factors. And you have thousands and thousands of tables from 6 years of your clinical trial. How do you consolidate into a summarized information in 6 pages where you're not only communicating benefits, you're communicating risks, so that someone from a scientific community is reading gets an accurate picture?
Thanks, Vijay, for comprehensive reply. And so now question is, what is the growth path for someone, say, who is working in India in clinical trial industry? And if someone gets trained in India, can they move to other countries? And we are already past 7, so and we still have quite a few questions. So I would request maybe quick replies so that we can move on to others. Yeah.
The short answer is yes. The growth opportunities are unlimited, from entry level to positions of department heads, directors, vice presidents. Each unique function has career progressions. Trained in India and working abroad, it happens all the time. Talent pool is always required. And it depends upon what you bring to the table. It's totally you as in a package, what value you are adding, how you are better than others. So, but yes, there are no boundaries, and in pharma, people move around all over the globe. If you open any website today, you may see job postings in Cambridge, UK, Sweden, the rest of the Europe, Poland, United States, Latin America. And if you're a clinical research associate, you may be traveling literally to all the countries also.
Then one question comes to mind after this. So you mentioned about CROs and you are working with a big pharma. Where should I aim to start my career if I say do a BSc or MSc in clinical research? Should I pitch for a big pharma or a CRO?
Well, I work in a pharma, and so I do not know the right answers. But I do see when you work in a CRO, you are very, very hands-on. You get to see the actual work in a trial, because the way CROs work, it's a work contracted by a pharmaceutical company for them to manage and run trial. It could be completely outsourced, the complete trial, or it could be a part of a trial. But then you do learn a lot. You do get seasoned, and when you look at the resumes, especially for specific field, if you're into analysis and reporting and you see CRO experience, or someone who is specializing in a lab data and you see someone has worked in a CRO, the person definitely knows the work and you would want to hire them. Pharma, because the shift is slightly different, because you do manage the trial, the management capabilities to have the global overview of trial, how to manage it. So the requirement becomes slightly different. So both avenues are very attractive, uh, but being in CRO can give you a lot of opportunity to learn it and then implement it in a pharma. But you won't lose it either way, whichever route you choose to come.
Okay. And there's a question regarding the salary. So what range is there, and where do you start, and is it the time you're spending and the training you are getting, is it worth in the growth you are having in the field? And what can you look for in, say, Indian context? How fast can you grow? And how, well, you mentioned that industry will grow at more than 11, 12%. So what do we look at? I'm choosing my career. What is your, say, prediction for the clinical trial industry?
So salaries, it always becomes a little tricky subject to discuss. But I tell you, initial salaries, no matter what it is, but once you have 3 to 4 years of experience, it's a profession which is very competitive right now. You find companies competing for people who have 3 to 4 years of an experience. Uh, Again, in the end, it depends upon what you really have learned, because this is also a business where you cannot overstate your skills. Once you're in a job in a 2 to 3 months, you really to know where you stand as opposed to your peers. Um, what I would recommend, first 3 to 4 years, consider it as a foundational learning. Make it a foundation for your career, to know your craft, to know, understand the field. And once we start working, we also realize, oh, within this profession, something else interests me more than what I thought. People tend to make changes within the profession itself, within the career, clinical research. So first 3 to 4 years, focus on finding your niche, develop it, keep abreast with the technology. Uh, the jobs are hyper competitive with multiple offers once you're past that hump. But initial salaries in India, I'm not very aware, but I have seen the packages which are very attractive. And sometimes not specific to AstraZeneca or anywhere, but I have seen candidates, and sometimes you feel like the candidates do have same remuneration what they have in Europe or anywhere else, and it comes as a sticker shock to you in terms of the salary requirements, and you start to go back because you haven't budgeted for that, and the candidate has 2 to 3 offers, and that's the scenario also. And what I would encourage candidates to go online and search in a Google or any other search engine, clinical research professional starting salary with the experience salary. And some of the websites like Glassdoor, they do give you a pretty good representation. But I do know, the sky's the limit, but it does come what you bring to the table. Just degree, or do you have uh, knowledge imbibed through that degree? That would make the difference. Degree is otherwise mere piece of a paper. If you have a degree and you show up, but you really haven't learned your craft, you have not invested in learning those concepts, it does not matter anything at that stage then.
And so this is a little bit of technical question. So you had mentioned about placebos during your talk. So one of the questions is, would it be better to replace a placebo with a standard drug rather than, say, putting a patient, if it is a chronic heart condition, say,
So I
would it
see
be?
someone who's already moving towards a in a field of clinical trial ethics out there, someone who asked that question. Yes and no. Clinical equipoise, if there is no drug out there, there is no standard of care, we do not know. Why would you want to put some individual on what standard of care? Because there may not be. Or let me say 3 scenarios. Um, you are doing a heart failure research, you do have a standard of care. So it could be a possibility on the one arm of the treatment, you give a patient standard of care, what is acceptable standard of critical care in the hospitals. Another treatment group gets that standard of care plus investigational drug to see that incremental change. What happens? Does this group improve or not? But there are scenarios where you really do not have a standard of care. You would not want to give anything except for placebo to ensure this new medication is effective. And sometimes there is no right comparator. Even there is a standard of care, you may have a totally new drug of a class that may seem very beneficial, and the only right trial would be doing it with the placebo. It's very, very ethical. I know how it sounds when you say it. And that's why when you go into clinical research and learn all this, it starts to come together and start making sense.
And so this is a question which is based on your career. Someone has asked, so what made you get into clinical research, starting from chemistry to management to biostatistics, epidemiology? Now you are heading statistical programming section of Big Pharma.
Okay, yeah, a very good question and interesting. So let me tell you, as a fresh management graduate, I started my career in sales, and that too in a timeshare sales in Delhi. And I realized after a while, I learned a lot. I learned a lot about communication, confidence, to be able to speak in front of people. But then I realized sales was not something for me. Research interested me a little bit more. And like a lot of questions being asked, I was asking everyone, what should I do? What should I do? I would ask my friends. And one day I decided, I think I would want to do surveys, and I like public health. And I quit my job. I packed my bags. I went back to Shimla, and I announced to my family, I'm opening a research company. And everyone was shocked, and they said, what kind of research company? I said, I don't know. I will do surveys and I will analyze data. And that's how it began. And I started doing little surveys for the health department and Department of Economics, if I recall correctly. And I realized I enjoy it. I realized I enjoyed looking at what people would say, how to consolidate that survey. But public health was something I got more and more interested in. And I was very fortunate at the time to get an opportunity to work with European Commission, who were doing health sectoral reforms. Started with them, learned a lot in that job. And then I decided, as Neeraj was saying, what clinical research will do to me. I realized I knew, I started to know a lot more, but I felt I needed to know something formally. I needed to grow, if I needed to grow in this field. And I was doing health policy, and I came to do health policy at Johns Hopkins. But once I was in Johns Hopkins, I realized I like epidemiology much more. I went into epidemiology. I did my master's again in my mid-30s, if that makes some people happy out there who are listening. And then I worked with Johns Hopkins. And when I started working, I said, wow, this is what I really wanted to do all these years. I learned a lot. Then I moved to pharma because after a while I said, let me see how industry works also. And though I do manage statistical programming, but a lot of my work, the foundation, the background remains on epidemiology and evaluating the strength of evidence and creating that narrative before we submit our trial results to health authorities. I hope that explains.
Yes, I think. So there are a lot of questions whether someone from medicine can get into, say, clinical research, bioinformatics, pharmacy,
Yeah.
chemistry, biology, biotechnology, pharmaceutical chemistry, medicinal chemistry. So then there are a lot of questions, and as you mentioned, I think this is a very broad field where different specialization has different roles in different sections. And as you mentioned, right from say a business degree to medicine degree to pharmacy to almost everyone can get into different parts of the clinical research and make their careers over there. And so, of course, you have worked in both the environments in US and India, and I would say a lot of big pharma are setting up their clinical research, uh, say branches in India, and we being almost like 1/3 of the,
Yeah.
or say at least 20% of the world population, we do matter a lot. And there's a huge, in terms of the market also, and being a pharma hub, and if we are launching a new drug in India, we also need to conduct at least a phase 3 trial for that. So eh, I would like to say that there would be a lot of jobs in India in this field. And uh, I hope Vijay answered most of the queries we had. Uh, Still, if you have any specific queries, you can write to us, and we'll pass on those to Vijay. And maybe we'll end with this last question, which is there scope in US in clinical research in upcoming era, which is the best university in US to study clinical research? So that's, and I would also say that we are starting these programs in clinical research this year, and we are trying to say get our syllabus vetted from different industries. We even took help of Vijay when we were designing the curriculum, and we are trying to keep all these aspects uh, because this is a field which is changing very fast, and uh, the kind of focus it got due to COVID-19, I think was unprecedented. It kind of brought it into a limelight that this is one field which students should look for as a career. So Vijay, over to you.
So very good question. And clinical research in US, yes. For the participant who asked this question, I would suggest Google right now, and you will see how much clinical trial market United States dominates. It does significantly. It's the prime market. Globally, three major markets are Europe, Japan, and United States for clinical research. Answer is definitely yes. Which is the best university in US? The part two. All academia institutions generally are very good. It depends a lot upon what you do with your degree, when they teach you, how seriously you take it. Did studying from Johns Hopkins help me? It did. If I do have the same curricula somewhere else, and there is a cost angle to it, will it help me? Definitely. The principle remains same. Biostatistics. If someone teaches you 2 + 2 is equal to 4, and if you take time to learn that 2 + 2 is equal to 4, it does not matter where you learn from. Of course, sometimes universities' perceptions count because maybe it's the seriousness of the students. One academic institutions may attract students who are more serious about their curriculum. They try to learn their craft. So, but short answer is it does not matter where you learn as long as you learn. Don't go for the piece of paper, go for the learning. I think you're on mute.
So thank you, Vijay. It was a very interesting session, and we learned a lot about clinical research and different aspects of it, and also how you can build your career, what kind of backgrounds can get into this field, and how the field is growing. Thanks a lot. And we have, of course, there are a lot of questions which I could not put to you. And there were some very technical questions also about how the clinical trials are conducted, why does it take so long, and how much does it cost. You did mention a little bit about, there were even questions regarding, like one of the questions was about, there was some patient who were asking if there are clinical trials being done for cancer. So lots of different types of questions. So of course, there are a lot of trials going on, even for cancer research. There are a lot of compounds in clinical research. Many of them are even available and in terms of joining as a volunteer in the trial. So we couldn't cover all the questions. We'll gather those and maybe we can answer those offline. Thanks a lot for your time and for accepting our invitation and for such a interactive and informative session. Thanks a lot.
My pleasure. And I'm very glad that I could present, and I hope it motivates some of the individuals to pursue this career. Again, in a summary, very rewarding. Be patient, go and learn your craft, and sky is the limit, depending upon what would you want to do. And the success, don't measure it in the monetary terms, define it what it means to you. And monetary things generally follow, but it has to be what would you define it, and pursue it accordingly. On that note, thank you everyone. Thank you, Neeraj, for the opportunity. Take care.
Thank you, participants, for joining the session, and I hope we answered lots of your questions. And as I mentioned, you can still send us your questions in, and we'll try to answer those and send you back by emails. Thanks a lot. Thank you, Vijay, and have a nice day. I know it's 4th of July, so enjoy your weekend, and all the best. Thank you.
Bye-bye.